Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 2nd of March 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. And we will be joined for this programme by live video feed by Alex Thompson, Eastern Approaches from Holland. Well, the weather, look out the window in Plymouth says that it's quite bright, actually. A bit of sunshine coming through. The wind is very cold, dull and cold in Norfolk. Freezing but sunny in northwest Surrey, and Wessex, apparently it's 4 seasons, so they've got a bit of Vivaldi there. Alex, what's it doing in the lowlands?
Just as you speak, Brian, it's brightening up. We've had intermittent hailstorms today, so pretty serious weather, but then again, it's only early March and the Netherlands can freeze till May, so we could be in for a rough ride yet.
Okay, but the wind is always important in Holland, as that is needed to drive the windmills to work the pumps to keep the seawater at a low level. Is the wind blowing?
Yes, we've had some quite sharp gusts this morning as well. Nothing compared with the Isle of Lewis, but still pretty gusty.
Okay, all right, thank you for that. Well, we're going to kick off with the subject of pensions, because as far as we can see, the British government wants people to work till they drop.
All the sort of smaller newspapers, in terms of tabloid-sized newspapers, are having kittens at this one. White-collar pensions blow, work until you're 81. And here's the Metro here. Workers must wait until they're 75 to retire. Now it's work to 75. Osborne poised to raise the pension age once again. I'm just going to say, don't say we didn't warn you. This graphic we've been using for so many years now in one form or another. And we're highlighting the obligations that the UK has, not just the government, but the UK as a whole. And the largest block on this is the state pensions black hole, £5 trillion. That's state pensions. Because these are unfunded obligations. In other words, as people retire, their pensions are paid out of tax receipts and borrowed money. There is no sort of state pension scheme, as it were, no national insurance scheme for pensions. At least any national insurance money that's taken in isn't used for this purpose. So that is the obligation already in the last, I think that figure is probably 3-4 years old now, and it's undoubtedly getting bigger as the population gets older. So we've been telling everybody about that for many years, but Brian, what are they going to do? Start killing old people quicker?
They're already doing it, Mike. For people who are wincing at me saying that, the evidence coming into the UK column now is quite overwhelming that there is a policy running through the NHS, running through care organisations where people are simply being dispatched. And what comes along with that is the theft of property. We're not going to be talking about this particular issue today. We're just mentioning it in line with pensions. The government's got a problem. How do you solve that? You get rid of the people. But we will be delving into that in more detail in the coming days and weeks. Well, this brings us nicely on to what's happening at home, I suppose. And the civil service is under attack for not being fair and reasonable. You've picked up on this one, Alex. The civil service shouldn't be on Remain's side. And Jeremy Hayward, I think, is the man in the picture, the boss of the civil service. So he appears to be in the limelight.
That's right. Now, he's a very, very smooth operator. Because of a video problem, I won't be able to see the slides quite in sync, but I can see now what's on, and that's the civil service shouldn't be on Remain's side. Now, this was the comment piece which may have prompted the parliamentary committee involved to call Hayward to account, because it had leaked that he had issued an edict which seemed, on the face of it, to say that serving government ministers should be given the silent treatment by Mandarins if they were known to be in favour of Brexit. Now, the wording of that, which I have here, was that it wouldn't be appropriate for them to provide briefings. So that was the wording on which the committee picked him up. Now, what's the following slide you have there? I believe is Sir Jeremy actually being called to account, isn't it?
No, this is head of civil service says Brexit ministers will get access to EU documents, and you wanted me to highlight some text at the end, which says
That's right.
the news came as it emerged that hundreds of thousands of civil servants have been gagged from promoting the Brexit cause on their personal Twitter and Facebook pages because of Sir Jeremy's guidance. A leaked email to staff at the DVLA in Wales, interpreting Sir Jeremy's letter, said the guidance also covers communications relevant to the referendum, including the use of social media and civil servants by civil servants in both their official and personal capacity in campaigning connected to the referendum. The Cabinet Office confirmed that the referendum guidance applies to all those employees as employed as civil servants working for the UK government. The Office for National Statistics said there were 439,323 civil servants in March last year, and a spokesman for the Civil Servants Union said that the civil service rules are too widely drawn and restrictive for the vast majority of civil servants, impinging on their right to a private life and to express their own opinions in their own time.
Well, I never thought I'd see the day that I was in agreement with the militant PCS union. I believe it's still headed by Mark Servotka, who was certainly the boss of it in my time. And there were plenty of people at GCHQ who withdrew in some form or other from the PCS because of its rampant Marxism. But the PCS is quite right. These are far too widely drawn rules. And this is not Sir Jeremy Haywood's own guidance. This is gold plating by the notorious DVLA, one of the worst parts of the civil service. But interpreting Sir Jeremy's letter, they're telling everyone working for the civil service, in this case the Driver and Vehicle Licensing Authority, that they can't put on Facebook, "I support Brexit." I mean, where does that come from? Is this a direct result of the Northcote Trevelyan reviews of 150, 70 years ago, or is it something completely new? I would say it's the latter.
If I may, Alex, and just thinking about this really on the spot in front of the camera, I think that Sir Jeremy Haywood is much too experienced to make some mistake in the way he's put something out. So I think this is classic. It's been drifted out, not appropriate. That's a very interesting phrase. What does that mean? He knew full well that by putting a very mild nuance to this, it was going to cause people to, oh my goodness, we can't talk about this issue. What we're watching is the evidence of the total politicisation of the civil service. And of course, it was Tony Blair that started this process. Well,
yes,
in a serious way.
I saw Sir Jeremy Haywood's predecessor, Sir Gus O'Donnell, write in 2006, it would have been, to the whole civil service. In my instance, it was the FCO and GCHQ, saying that the Foreign Office, the Foreign Secretary, the new one, Margaret Beckett, was a jolly good egg, and we could take it from him that she was a jolly good egg. Now, if this is the role of an impartial head of the civil service, I don't know what's going on. So his initial wording to the general civil service about the don't brief ministers if they want us to leave the EU said, quote, "It will not be appropriate or permissible for the civil service to support ministers who oppose the government's official position by providing briefing or speech material on this matter." And then, of course, we get him hauled over the coals by the Commons Committee. What slide do you have on that?
Right. Well, first of all, you asked us to put up the tweet, which it says Jeremy Haywood's face when MP Cheryl Gillen said ministers aren't stupid.
Yes, well, the face says it all, doesn't it?
Should we just say for listeners that the face of Jeremy Haywood is a smirk? So when the comment's been made, ministers aren't stupid, there's a big, it's a supercilious grin on his face is really what he's showing, I think.
Yes.
Absolutely. And then it turns into, I'll read here the parliamentary sketch, which describes what went on. I think as we talk, you may have a slide of the parliamentlive.tv session. You can listen in audio or video to the whole session. But here's the climax for those who don't have the time. The Telegraph speechwriter, I think it's Michael Deacon here, yes it is, says, Sir Jeremy looked entirely unruffled, that is when he was challenged about his don't brief the enemy edict. To be fair, Sir Jeremy would probably look entirely unruffled if you poured custard over his lap, then set fire to his shoes. But here he could scarcely have seemed less troubled. He looked almost magnificently bored. Indeed, his boredom had a kind of grandeur. This was a Caesarly boredom, a kingly boredom. "I think there's been a misunderstanding, if I may say so," said Sir Jeremy. He added that Eurosceptic ministers would only be denied access to, quote, the briefing material and speech material used by pro-EU ministers in their campaigning. To all other EU-related papers, he insisted Eurosceptic ministers would have the same access as always. But this is marvellous, gasped Tory Eurosceptic Bernard Jenkin eventually. What a breath of fresh air. This is so straightforward. We might even be able to shorten this whole session. That would be a pleasure, replied Sir Jeremy. So, the entire business, asked Kate Hoey, by the way, she's the leading Eurosceptic on the Labour benches, had been a fuss over nothing? I couldn't possibly say, replied Sir Jeremy.
My very house of cards, Alex.
Absolutely.
And of course, he's sitting in that chair, just acknowledging that he can play MPs off one against the other, depending on which side of the European argument they are. So this man is actually in front of a camera, just showing people this is the real powerhouse in the government. And of course, we have been reporting, because we are being told from sources close to the government, that basically there is no politics now on the floor of the House. There's no proper debate. We simply have Oliver Letwin controlling the Cabinet Office and working hand in glove with Jeremy Haywood to dictate to MPs what the policy is. That's what he's really talking about. I think so.
Yes, and the Cabinet Office manual now has the status of an undeclared constitution. And Sir Jeremy Haywood and his mandarins very much tell MPs how they are allowed to form a government after a general election.
A dictatorship.
Oh, no other word for it. I mean, if it was happening in faraway Stan, we would call it a dictatorship without much hesitation, wouldn't we?
Yeah.
Okay, next up, Alex, was the Guido Fawkes article, Self-Declared Lifelong Eurosceptic Swap Sides. This swapping sides, it seems to be continuing, and really people struggling to find out or work out which side of this argument they should be on. If this article is to be believed, then really the reason for this is just attempting to manage their careers and jumping onto the side they think is going to be best for themselves.
Yeah, so the point here is you've got no conscientious reason for voting for any Conservative, Labour or Liberal Democrat MP. Now, I would say that there's one exception to that in good conscience, and that was discussed a little by Brian on Saturday night with regard to some of the psychological disappearing of people cases. And that is that if you have someone like Bethan Jenkins, an Assembly member in Cardiff, who's, well, yes, she's Plaid Cymru, but apart from wanting to break up the UK, she does actually do her job in speaking up for the Linda Lewis family, then that's a good reason to vote for an establishment or nationalist party. Otherwise, vote for an independent candidate. You've only got yourself to blame. I think you owe it to God and your forefathers to vote by conscience and not say, well, we're in a safe Tory seat here, so we'll have to vote, in this case, for Angela Watkinson. Because, as Guido Fawkes points out, Havering, which is on the Essex side of London, has just been found to be the most Eurosceptic constituency in the entire country.
Well, indeed, you've given us this one from the Herald. It is interesting that the Herald publishes this map within a day or two of David Scott commenting on this last Friday. But anyway, this is an interesting little map showing the most Europhile areas of Britain, and Scotland seems to have quite a lot of them, according to the Herald at least.
It does, but look at the shades of green. You've got places where the RAF is just clinging on by the skin of its teeth, like Moray, which is up at the central north of Scotland, which isn't green. In other words, it is a Eurosceptic part of Scotland because its economy is intertwined more with the UK and the patriotism is there. Where are the dark green spots, the really rabid Europhile spots in Scotland? Are they in the yes cities of Glasgow and Dundee? No, they are not. They're in the arrogant, wealthy cities, power centres of Edinburgh, with the SNP seat there, of course, or the seat of power, and Aberdeen with its oil money. And in third place, Stirlingshire, with some rather wealthy rural people with not much to lose, perhaps. The same appears in Wales, where just sitting above Pembrokeshire, where I know we have viewers, which is Eurosceptic, you've got Ceredigion or Cardiganshire, dark green. And again, that's because of the creation of a kind of otherworldly rural idyll there and not having to deal with the immigration and economic consequences of the EU. And even within Greater London in the inset, you can see the boroughs where foreigners and the very wealthy prevail, are very much in favour of the EU. And at the east end of London there, flaring in red, is that's the very constituency I just mentioned, Havering.
Okay. Thank you very much for that, Alex. We're just going to move into the subject that if you speak out, the government doesn't like you. This one is classic. This is an email sent in to us and a number of other people by Dave Barmby, who has been exposing Cameron's duplicity over the European Union. And it's there on screen to prove it's real. But essentially what he says is that he planned to put a stall up in Witney constituency in the town square. Grassroots go, let's get out of the EU. And he gets told by the, he gets told that he needs the permission of the district council and the town council. So immediately the mention of get out of the EU came up, in came the rules, you can't do that here. Well, where does this sort of thing lead to? We just jumped back to 21st Century Wire. Now, this was an article back in 2015, but we think it should be brought to the fore again, because what Patrick Henningsen was warning about was that it was David Cameron pointing a finger at people. If you dared to challenge his policies, if you dared to speak out about what was happening, then basically you were a conspiracy theorist. And if you're a conspiracy theorist, the next thing you're likely to be is involved with terrorism. So the bit at the bottom here, he said there's essentially two occasions. The first came with Cameron's warped speech at the UN, and afterwards a similar charge was made by the UK leader against anyone who dares press the issue of institutional paedophilia and child abuse. So we're going to say well done, Patrick Henningsen, because he was warning and we think he was spot on. But you may be interested in this one, Alex, from a French source. And it's basically saying that the French education minister, the lady pictured there, she'd taken place in a big conference. I think there was about 300 people, educationalists, politicians, psychologists. France vows to fight terror conspiracy theorists. And apparently the French government is now extremely worried that youngsters of 16, 17 are beginning to question the official line on incidents. And as a result, they've got a major conference before they get back into apparently reframe the children. Well, if that's not good enough, let's have a look at this one. France arrests climate change deniers under new Orwellian powers. And basically under the terrorism laws, they've gone in, arrested a big group of people. This is historic as we're reporting it. But three of the individuals were effectively put under house arrest because they had to report to the police 3 times a day, and then they had to stay in their homes overnight. So great fear by governments, David Cameron, the French, anybody speaking out and challenging their policies. And of course, it's not just a European issue, because Abru here reporting that as a result of documents from US Army Private Manning, what's actually coming in here is that the US got very, very frightened. And when press in Nigeria was questioning what happened on 9/11, particularly a report that 4,000 Israelis were tipped off by their government that there was an attack coming. So they stayed away from work on September the 11th. And in the documentation, the US government is saying this is very dangerous. How are we going to counter that? What's your thoughts? This is suppression of free speech in front of us, isn't it?
Yes. Constitutions, of course, differ from country to country, and the route to one world government and suppression is different in each country. Each government will do with what it thinks it can get away with based on the history of its own people's alertness or asleepness in the matter, and certain key phrases in the country's history. The French are all about the droits de l'homme, human rights, which they think they invented in 1789 and after. But the whole point of that was enlightenment, wasn't it? And what you're outlining, particularly with France now, is returning to a medieval superstition, whereby if anyone in society says, I don't think the world is getting warmer, they have to be locked up and made to do penance, otherwise nasty men will come and shoot us up.
Yes. With that, I pause because you're spot on. Well, I'm just going to end on this one because there's a ray of hope in this. Encourage people to read this article. It's about a Christian student, Sheffield University, doing social sciences to become a social worker. And basically, he put up on his Facebook a tweet which gave the biblical quote that being gay was not a good thing. So this relates to Leviticus. Now, what happened was he was immediately thrown out of the university because they said to him, this is just, you can't be a social worker if you're a Christian and you believe these things. And in the article, it refers to another case with a Mr. Smith who is thrown out of a Trafford Housing Trust along the same lines. They said that it could damage their reputation for diversity, etc., etc. But what the Telegraph points out, and I think we've got to give the Telegraph credit for this, it says, in a landmark ruling at the High Court, Mr. Justice Briggs said that Mr. Smith had done nothing wrong in expressing his view that, on the contrary, his employer was guilty of a serious and repudiatory breach of trust. Crucially, the judge made clear in a written judgment that there is no right in law not to be offended, and that offence is the necessary price. And that offence is the necessary price of free speech. Now, that seems to be a judge who is actually still thinking and realises the danger of this political correctness, which I'll come back. Tony Blair, of course, with John Prescott, started to bring in. Gordon Brown followed it, and Cameron is continuing it. But this judge seems to have got the measure of them, Alex.
Yes, it would seem so, because we do have judges on both sides of the Atlantic now. Even one who's on the US Supreme Court, who's been silent for 10 years, suddenly saying, hang on, people's constitutional rights are being breached here. Judges are starting to say, no, sorry, politicians, you're legislating for things that you don't understand. And the subtext is go back to school and learn some basic constitution.
Indeed. Right. Related to that, I suppose, better use of data in government. This is a new consultation from the government on data sharing. And it's a consultation which is going to run for 8 weeks. It focuses on data held by public sector organisations, and they're going to look at how that data is assessed and used. And they say it seeks to improve data security across government whilst making citizens' lives easier. And who's behind this? Well, it's our old friend Matt Hancock. And he's saying there is huge potential for improving citizens' lives through data sharing in the UK. The consultation we launched today will help make sure we get data right and bolster security while making people's lives better. Now, that's one little quote, and apparently it's making people's lives better twice in that one little quote. So I think he's protesting a little too much. So, Alex, what's your view on this whole data being the fuel for the digital revolution, and whether data sharing as being driven by the government at the moment is making people's lives better?
Well, my mother retired from a long career in public service, and she was in a branch of public service where she was obliged to use nothing other than permanent fountain pen ink and official registers. And that service worked since 1837 perfectly. And it's only got worse since it's been digitized. So I really don't see the need for government to have mass data. The usual rules apply. Follow the money and follow the ideology. Who is paying people to say that the government needs oodles of our data as never before? And what ideologies have crept into the government, both politics and public service, in order to give us the idea that we need to be crunching mass amounts of data in order to deliver government services? I mean, public services is a broad term and often taken in vain these days. It simply means giving the people the facilities they're paying the government for, and that they've elected the government at local and national level to provide them. It does not mean improving their lives according to the insights and dictates of the conscience of other people.
Well, as usual, if I just bring this one back up again, better use of data in government. There are a whole bunch of documents on this listed on this page, about 10 or so. But just to look at some of the examples they give of where data usage is really good for people, apparently it supports the administering of fuel poverty payments. It enables access to civil registration data, for example, births, deaths and marriages. And this prevents authorities from sending letters to people who are deceased. So that's good. Reduces the billions of pounds lost and cost to the taxpayer in preventing, detecting and dealing with fraud against the public sector. It helps citizens manage their debt more effectively and reduce the estimated 24.1 billion of overdue debt owed to government. It enables the Office for National Statistics, apparently, to access detailed administrative data from across government and businesses to provide more accurate, frequent and timely statistics, and to update how the census is managed rather than using surveys. And apparently it supports accredited researchers to access and link data to carry out research for the public benefit. And they also, in their press release, mention that the use of data by the Cabinet Office, the Department of Work and Pensions, the DVLA is another example they give. And of course, we should forget that the DVLA sells the data that they gather on us. So they're quoting in their little press release that the DVLA has provided this really useful service where people can access the DVLA website and see how many penalty points they've got and so on. But in the meantime, of course, the DVLA is selling that data to car rental companies and a whole insurance companies and a whole bunch of other companies, and making money from it on top of the so-called road tax. So this is also just another revenue stream, is it not, Alex?
Yes, Mike, it drums up a lot of money. Look at those who have been in public service, that rather grand and loosely defined thing, who then go off mid-career and become consultants or form businesses and get nice contracts with government. Look at their ideology, look at their funding, and look at what they're able to do with this big data. I mean, the government has, I believe it's called G-Cloud now, almost a requirement that you should have access to a huge cloud system, who knows who's controlling that, in order to bid for these contracts. And as you were reading through that long list of ostensible benefits, you know what struck me was this was a tongue-in-cheek way of saying, well, of course, the public servants we hire in these days are so harassed and rushed off their feet and maybe so ill-educated and poorly trained that they can't do their job without having a computer prompting them. So it's an insult to the public servants, and it's also a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah. Alex, you've put up a very good article on the UK column entitled 5 Consequences of Scottish Ministers Impersonating the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. We encourage people to go and read that article. The next image we've got is of our old friend Alex Salmon behind the bar. Would you like to just introduce us and tell us when you'd like Mr. Salmon on screen?
Very well. Yes, Mr. Humza Yousaf, who's actually younger than me, I still have to get used to this, that there are ministers younger than me, was brought up in Glasgow, was a politics graduate from the University of Glasgow, has become the Scottish Minister's Minister for Europe and International Development, although, as I say in the article, Scottish ministers are interchangeable. They're like fungible assets. They're all for one and one for all, but okay, his ostensible title is Minister for Europe and International Development. And despite being a graduate of politics from Scotland's second oldest and greatest university, he is apparently unable to work out what the Peace of Westphalia and the post-1648 Order of European Statehood involves, or world statehood, and he's written to Malawi. And he's actually told the Malawian High Commission that they are naughty boys for arresting Malawian citizens in Malawi for crimes under Malawian law. Now, the article outlines, to the best of my layman's insights, anyone who's interested in politics and the constitution will realise this kind of stuff, what this will lead to. It will lead to Scotland becoming treated as if it were a diplomatic player and expected to live up to those expectations when the infrastructure is not in place, because all the talented Scots who understand public policy and foreign policy and diplomacy are working in the FCO or in international organisations. The point about the bar is that Mr. Yousaf, well, Mike might actually throw in a line there. Mike, if you had wandered into a pub in Belfast in your youth and it looked like that, what would you do?
Run away.
Absolutely. And for those not familiar with Northern Ireland or the west of Scotland, do explain what the symbology of this walls and what's going on here.
Oh well, no, you go ahead. I mean, but clearly we can see a tricolor in this on the ceiling, for example. So it's pretty clear where the allegiance of that bar lies.
Absolutely. And this is Alex Salmond, who even when I was a teenager was so keen to drum up the historically sceptical Irish Catholic vote in Glasgow and Dundee for the SNP's cause, because they quite rightly thought that the SNP was a somewhat fascist Presbyterian establishment party, that even in those days, in the 90s, he was telling anyone who challenged him, "Oh, you parade your anti-Catholic prejudices elsewhere." Well, I can never imagine him going into an equivalent Rangers supporters bar with red hands on the wall. And the more you look at that picture, the more you see indications that politicians ought not be hereabouts. For example, the gentleman's toilets is marked boys with a BHOYS, which is actually an alternative term for Irish nationalist and Republican fighters in the parlance of Northern Ireland and Glasgow. So very, very unsavoury stuff. And in the middle of it is Mr. Youssef, who believes that he can bring human rights and world peace, regardless of borders.
Well, very murky stuff north of the border. Well, jumping overseas, you've got some information here about Georgia.
Yes, I'm going to read the first paragraph or so of an article by foreignpolicy.com, which you may have on the slide, and then I'll say, next slide, please, and then I'll read another Georgian report. And my challenge to the listeners and viewers is to work out in 5 seconds which writer was closer to the facts and closer to the ground, okay? Here's the foreign policy one. A prominent Georgian opposition leader, Alexei Petriashvili, was shot and wounded on February 26th at a cemetery in central Tbilisi. While he's expected to make a full recovery, the attack is likely to aggravate Georgia's worsening political divides. At the very least, it will raise questions about the government's ability to maintain public security, although they actually write pubic security here, just months before October parliamentary elections. Petriashvili's attackers, reported as, quote, well-trained, remain unknown and at large. A former Minister for Euro-Atlantic Integration, Petriashvili is a leading figure in the Free Democrats Party. Blah, 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 blah. Next slide, please. Here is an English language article by a Georgian journalist. And sorry for the funny English, but this is how the Georgians write. One of the leaders of Free Democrats Party, Alexei Petriashvili, was attacked and shot in the legs today. According to the Interior Ministry, unknown people physically abused Alexei Petriashvili at Sabotalu district and shot him. The incident took place at a cemetery. Investigation has already been launched. According to one of the versions, Petriashvili had quite a tense relationship with Sosodolidze, the individual previously linked with journalist Eka Mishveladze, who is now Petriashvili's wife. According to these reports, Alexei Petriashvili and Sosodolidze have known each other for quite a long time. As Petriashvili's friends say, he had been threatened recently. So
yeah, go ahead.
Yes, no prizes for guessing which journalist was writing on the basis of primary sources and which was wanting to spin this into a nasty Russia shoots opposition leader story.
And they couldn't even get their spelling right?
No, pubic. I mean, it's ridiculous, isn't it?
Well, Alex, just before we move on from Georgia, we heard a few days ago rumours that Mikhail Saakashvili, who of course was president of Georgia up until some time ago, and then has moved to Ukraine, where he's magically been given Ukrainian citizenship and is now one of the leading lights in the Odessa region. There was a rumor going around, I believe, coming from some dubious sources in Russia that there was going to be some kind of prosecution for war crimes against him. Very disappointed to discover that that wasn't true, but there's still a lot of rhetoric building, and Foreign Policy magazine, of course, is one of the main sources for this, trying to spark something off or re-spark something off in Ukraine once again. And Saakashvili, absolutely well placed to help if they do spark something off in the Ukraine. But I think you might agree with me that if there, aside from Tony Blair, if there was one other person on the planet that perhaps should be considered for the War Crimes Tribunal, it would be him.
Well, yes, he and his defence minister and the rest of the crew, as was established in a UN report after the facts by Heidi Tagliavini, issued orders to shoot on South Ossetian civilians, with tank rounds, in fact. There's no getting away from that. And Saakashvili's there in a part of Ukraine, which is Odessa, sandwiched between the Black Sea coast and Moldova, and the separatist Republic of Transnistria, which we're going to talk about in a moment. So he's in a very precarious position geographically, and it doesn't take an international tribunal to try Saakashvili. If the Russians get to him physically, they will put him on trial. I'm quite sure of it.
Yeah. So tell us about frozen conflicts then.
Yes, this is just a bit disappointing that a casual readership might think, oh, well, Transnistria, the frozen conflict between Moldova and Ukraine, looks like it's going to be solved peacefully, so obviously all the others will be too. I'm afraid, as the article itself makes clear, if you read it, that there's no comparing one with the other, because in this case, the people are of the same language throughout the conflict area and travel freely to and fro, exchange currency freely, and are quite prepared, it seems, to be Russian protectorates while being taxed as if they were in the EU, so that both worlds are happy. So, in other words, you get bureaucratically the worst of both worlds. But the author as well, Thomas de Waal, I knew him peripherally when I was in the foreign policy world and had a great deal of esteem for him. He was an expert, well, he still is, but the tone of this article, now he's gone to Carnegie and Brussels, is really populist. And I'm afraid there's no explanation for that I can see other than that he's been told to write down to the thick public. Either that or he's been sub-edited to make his writing more juicy than he himself would write it. I never saw him writing in this style. So be careful when you see expert opinion bylines in journalism. It may be that they've only provided the bare bones of something which a foundation or other interest group has then sexed up.
Yes, and the other thing that you wanted to mention was the Nemtsov March organizer severely beaten.
Yes, well, the barest of details. An organizer of an opposition party against Putin gets a couple of ribs broken. I don't want to denigrate what's happened to him in a provincial town of Chelyabinsk. And this is almost front page news on the leading Eurasia website, news website for the Anglo-American types and the Euro-integrationists, which is Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, a US-funded website. It's almost as if there were no opposition politicians or independent candidates being physically threatened in Britain or France or the Netherlands or Germany, isn't it? Well, in fact, there are daily, but we don't read about them.
Well, last night, Alex, we were in Frome in Somerset, and a gentleman called Robert Stewart was giving a presentation on this BBC documentary. It was originally shown by Panorama in 2013, just at the time of the vote on whether we were going to bomb Syria or not. I'm sure everybody will recognise that image that's on that page. And the documentary was called Saving Syria's Children. And Robert Stewart has been investigating this documentary, how it came to be, and the truth or otherwise, the veracity of otherwise of the content. And he gave an excellent presentation. Now I recommend everybody goes and has a look at his blog here, Fabrication in BBC Panorama, Saving Syria's Children. All the information that he gave last night is there. It's always better when he presents it, of course. But one of the doctors involved in that was Saleha Hassan, who is ex-British Army, and she was one of the doctors involved in producing that documentary. And so this little YouTube video, if you go and have a look at it, is a report from Newsnight. This is one of the things that Robert highlighted last night regarding Hospex. And these are extremely expensive, I suppose you could say, simulations of battlefield conditions where they actually build exactly the scenario that they may see in a war zone or some kind of scenario that they want to simulate. And they were really showing how accurately they portray the injuries and so on. And so one of the examples that Robert shows on his website, at the top there you can see a photograph from that report on Hospex and showing the injuries, the simulated injuries on an actor lying on a gurney. And underneath you can see one of the patients, one of the apparent patients in the Saving Syria's Children documentary, also lying on a gurney. And he's simply highlighting, this is only one of the points that he's making, simply highlighting the similarities. And this is perhaps one of the explanations for what happened in this documentary. And he just also highlighted this organization, Trauma FX, which provides these types of services. Now, he and I are by no means suggesting that they were involved in Saving Syria's Children, because we have no direct evidence for that. But nonetheless, this is one of the companies based in York, I believe, that provides services to the military and other government agencies and I believe probably in some cases, not necessarily Trauma FX, but in some cases to the film industry as well. And the kind of service they provide is highly realistic. And so when you put this alongside some of the other strange aspects of that documentary, it's quite a powerful case, isn't it, Brian?
Certainly. Well, we believe from the outset there was something about those video clips that just did not seem right. The behaviour of the injured people didn't seem right. And one of the things that came out in the talk last night is that other doctors who've treated people, particularly with severe burns, say that usually the intensity of the pain is so great that even when they've had sedatives, the people are almost beside themselves to the extent they often can't understand simple instructions. And that was clearly not the case with the individuals that the BBC put forward. But the other thing we were able to do at that public meeting, of course, was bring out that if you look at BBC's charity, BBC Media Action, that charity boasts of working in countries with opposition groups to help destabilise governments. So the step to say that you would set up a false, or you would essentially not report the truth over an incident in order to gain a political advantage, and in this case it would be the BBC trying to influence the vote to bomb Syria, I think is pretty important. The other individual that was mentioned was the doctor's father, Mr. Al-Kurdi, and on an occasion we were able to speak to Mr. Al-Kurdi. He also claimed that he was the man that brought the first sample of a chemical weapon back to UK, which seems a very remarkable thing because chemical weapons are very, very dangerous. So a very strange mix between the BBC, ex-army, medical accident simulation, and I think it was an excellent presentation by Mr. Stewart, so we'd encourage people to look. Alex, just a brief comment if you wish, and we'll move on through.
I think we'll just carry on through. You put it pretty eloquently there, Brian.
Okay, thank you for that. Well, we're just going to end with the subject of the BBC, really, child abuse. And a lot of people, okay, we've got some lines on the screen there, they'll become evident in a minute, but we've got many people who've contacted us to say that the BBC's Moral Maze with Mr. Burke tonight, I think that's at 9 o'clock, is going to be looking at the subject of child abuse, historic sex abuse. This is the thing. Sorry, let's just bring in the next bit. Apologise for this. Now you can see what the purpose of the red line is. He ends the introduction to this programme by saying there are those who argue that for too long the victim's voice has been ignored in our legal system and these investigations help them get closure. But is that the same as justice? Should we hear these cases in court, or would they be better suited to some kind of truth and justice commission? In an increasingly victim-focused climate, is our pursuit of historic crimes distorting the meaning of justice? And I can only say to this that if you look at it, what is this man doing? He's helping to nudge the subject of child abuse investigations into the long grass. We don't want them coming near a court. We want to put them into some kind of truth and justice commission where, of course, the truth will never come out. Well, is it any surprise that if we look at Moral Maze, the two key men, we've got David Aaronovitch and Michael Burke. If we look at Mr. Aaronovitch alone, he's produced article after article attacking the idea that there's any significant child abuse or child abuse rings working in UK, and he certainly doesn't like the idea that they may be connected with senior establishment or political figures. So a cynical, well done the BBC, helping to deny child abuse. But we'll see what the reaction to the programme is tonight. Well, if that's the BBC, we'll just move on to Barnardo's. And we had a couple of shocked people say to us, have you seen this? Well, this is part of, obviously, the Barnardo's Twitter page. And what was being pointed out was that we've now got Barnardo's not so much protecting children, but helping to guide their sexual orientation. and the comments were two good-looking young girls feature here. They also feature in this one, and we've got the remarkable statement by Barnardo's, "Please help us continue our vital child sexual exploitation." Now, perhaps they didn't realise what they might be saying there, but people not happy with these images. Where does this lead? Well, it leads to the Faith Toolkit, because Barnardo's is apparently going into schools now in order to support LGBTQ young people and help them in their identity so they're not bullied. On the right are supporting organisations. So apparently we've got some Christian churches, but we've got the Hindu Society, Sarbat, Rainbow Jews, a whole mixture of people, but this is all about sexual identity of children. Well, this was the next part, because one of Barnardo's senior managers north of the border in Scotland had tweeted out that Barnardo's were launching the Faith Toolkit to help schools support LGBTQ young people via Gay Times. And we were very interested with this. We followed the link through, and this is what we see. We actually see that the Barnardo's article is promoted on a very explicit gay site. Now, it would be exactly the same as if this article was embedded in a girly magazine, but we've got some pretty sexually explicit photographs here, and we say, is this the appropriate place to put Barnardo's information? The Barnardo's man in the article is Manjinder Singh Sidhu. He helped build the toolkit, and he said what he loves about it is that Barnardo's is actually working alongside schools, going into schools, talking about faith and sexuality, which are topics generally considered taboo and risky. And then we find the resources have been put together by Barnardo's Positive Identity Service in collaboration with local schools, faith groups, and gender and sexual orientation teams. Where does all this come from? Well, of course, it comes from the British government, because if we start to have a look at who's in charge, Nicky Morgan, she's in charge of diversity. This is her Twitter page. You can see that she's very excited by 7,000 same-sex couples getting married. That's not really what we're interested in. We're interested in this. The toolkit was funded through a grant from the Department for Education and Government Equalities Office for the homophobic, biphobic, transphobic bullying grant program. Is it real? Well, of course it is. And here is the evidence of that. We got a very uncomfortable feeling, as did many members of the public, that we have the subject of sexual and identity of young children being posted on websites which are clearly highly sexually provocative. Alex, just a brief comment from you, if you will.
Brian, the devil's in the detail. I noticed that their Islamic partner for Leeds or Calderdale or whatever the region of West Yorkshire in question is the Quilliam Foundation. A couple of mental associations come to mind. 7th of July 2005, Mohammed Tanweer. Ringing any bells?
The bell ringing for me is the connection with the EDL leader, Tommy Robinson, and the Quilliam Foundation.
Yes, it's. I think I would go so far as to say, and I hope to present some material on the Patrick Sukhdev case another time to back this up, that Quilliam is something like, I don't think it was created, but it's certainly been inflated by the government by money and attention to be a kind of pocket version of Islam, really, the government's favoured version of Islam. So Muslims are really being duped and misrepresented here.
Well, I thoroughly support that statement, and of course, with the Muslim community members that we've spoken to, their concerns about what's happening in the UK mirror the concerns of other reasonable people. So this is the key thing: is watching what the government's doing. You've got a book for us.
Well, before we go to the book, I'm only going to mention this in 1 second. Of course, US election going on. John Oliver, who used to be on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, has done an expose on Donald Trump. Quite a number of people. It's looking like it's going to be Trump and Clinton for the main candidates for the presidency. Quite a number of people thinking that perhaps Donald Trump has something to give. I would recommend people look at John Oliver's. It's a little 20-minute piece on Donald Trump. Gives a little bit of information in a humorous way. You might have trouble watching it. There are versions of it on YouTube that can be watched in the UK. Otherwise, use a VPN to get access to it. But do watch that if you get a chance. Yes, Alex's books.
Yes, very quickly then. This is Dr. John Coleman, an Englishman who emigrated to the US in 1969 and has become an American constitutionalist and really a grandfather figure of the truth and conspiracy movement. His books, particularly the Committee of 300 there on the left, the conspirators hierarchy, is unbeatable for detail. I am not endorsing all his theories. You never can with these books, but I am saying it's an unputdownable book because it is full of fact and intelligent argument. And he was perhaps of the last generation, being already an adult in the 60s, who could go to the British Library, or the British Museum Library as it then was, and piece together the newspaper reports he was looking at and realize what was behind it all. And on the right here, you have a more recent book of his, Diplomacy by Deception, pretty unarguable detail of how the US and British governments have acted against their own national interests and against the expectations of their own civil servants and voters for a long time. Coleman claims to have been working for MI6 in Angola in the 60s before he emigrated. And I have to say, his attitude, his wording, his body language and so on doesn't ring true with that. Yet the puzzling thing is his detail is second to none. And he goes back to the 17th century, pointing out that exclusive secret societies have a much longer history than just the Illuminati and the modern city of London. So I hope it's a broadening read for some people. But like with Michael Shrimpton, I think he overestimates, perhaps in his own mind, quite honestly, the role he's had with intelligence. But the detail he comes out with is something to store and file away in your head, really.
Alex, thank you very much for that. Well, we're always encouraging people to read, do their own research, check the information that we are talking about. It's so important to do that. And of course, if you do that research, you discover things we don't know. So the more reading people do, the better, and books are great, which is why the government is trying to get rid of them, of course. Well, important to keep a sense of humour. We'd like to end with some really good news, and that is we got this email earlier today that the China Steel Corporation is offering us a deal, and we're going to be able to get 5% of contracts that we can win for the Chinese Steel Corporation. So I think, Mike, our funding issues are really solved as we get into major steel contracts throughout the world.
Maybe we can build an even bigger studio.
We can build a, steel frame, probably. So there we are. It's good news for the UK column as China climbs on board. Alex, thank you very much for joining us. For everybody else, we are talking some very, very serious topics at the moment. The British government deceiving the electorate over Europe, free speech being closed down, our children being sexualised. Who can stop it, or how do we stop it? It's up to us, it's up to you, it's up to all of us. And of course, the biggest weapon is truth and exposure. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Good. Oh, good.